So I got my readers on. It is time to join part 3 of Joan Johnston, Surrender. We're back to Tag and Brian. Tag: "Hey, Brat." "What do you want, Brian?" "I want you to look at me. I've seen all I need to see." "Which is what?" "You're flushed, you're sweaty, your eyes are wells of pain, you're limping like a pirate with some stump for a leg. What is it you want me to like me to notice?" "Look at me." When she did, he grinned broadly. "Oh, you crazy man," she said angrily. "How can this possibly be a grinning time like this?" This is page 209. "If a few days with you is all I have left, I intend to enjoy each and every one of them. That means being happy. That means thinking good thoughts. That means loving you while I can." Oh, what a man. What? You heard me. Loving you. Might as well say it. I've got nothing to lose, neither do you. Do you love me, Tag? You're off your rocker. Sick with fever. You've lost it completely. Yeah, maybe, but do you love me? Page 210. That would be stupid, considering the fact that you've written yourself off. I mean, what would be the point of loving a guy who's only got a few days left to live? Aha! I see your clever plan. You get me to live in the hope that you'll say that you'll love me if I survive. She shook her head, as though he were a pitiful excuse for a man. Maybe he was, but he didn't intend to waste whatever time he had left, especially the time he had left when he wasn't out of his head with fever. "Let's plan our life together after we get out of here," he suggested. "You go home to the Lucky Seven, and I go home to the Kingdom Come. End of story. Except now that Matt's moved in and you're not going to have a home at Kingdom Come for much longer. And life hasn't been too comfortable for me at the Lucky Seven since I messed things up between Aiden and Leah. I suppose that means we should get a place of our own. We need to know how many kids we're going to have, so we'll know how many bedrooms to get. We discussed all this in high school," she said. "We did? I don't remember any such conversation. I said I wanted 2 kids, and you said you wanted 4. We settled on 3. Huh. No way did I agree to that. If you have 3, 1 gets left out. 2 or 4. That's my final offer. Did I mention you're crazy? What does that have to do with anything? So 3 bedrooms? 3, I'm confused. You'll probably have 2 sets of twins, since they run in your family. 1 bedroom for the boys and 1 bedroom for the girls, and 1 bedroom for us." She laughed, and he absorbed the happy sound as though it was a pail of cool water dumped over his head. "You with me?" he asked. "Sure. Why not? The kids go to school in Jackson, no boarding schools, but college wherever they want." She nodded, then said, "Barrel racing for the girls, cow roping for the boys." "Agreed. No bareback bronc or bull riding. I won't encourage it, but I wouldn't discourage it either." She huffed out a breath of air. "I'm not raising sons to have their skulls crushed and their ribs gored by some nasty bull." This is page 211. They can wear helmets and flak jackets when she made a face, and he said, "I don't want to tell my kids that what they can and can't do. I'd rather advise them of the dangers and let them judge for themselves." He put his hand up to keep her from ejecting and added, "When they're old enough to make those sorts of decisions for themselves, of course. I'm not going to stop flying. Never said that you had to. I'm not going to stop firefighting and smoke jumping." She shot him a look, and he knew what she was thinking. Page 212. This is what she's thinking. "If you're still able. If you aren't crippled. If you aren't dead." He didn't have to say anything. There was nothing he could say. His leg hurt like a son of a gun, and he was dizzy. He felt himself stagger and grabbed a pine branch to stay upright. "Thank God," she whispered. He was so disoriented it took him a moment to realize that they were stumbling onto another stream. This one was wider and deeper. He lurched a step or 2 farther and sank down in the shade of an aspen near the water. "Gotta take a little break." He felt her hand on his forehead, calming and soothing, felt her brush her hair from the back of his face, and she helped him remove his PG bag and settle comfortably on his back. She was kneeling next to him, and he felt her cool cheek pressed against his, along with something warm and wet. A tear? "Don't cry," he mumbled. "We're gonna make it. Just have to hold on a little. Moving forward. Page 217. Brian was going to die. It had only been 12 days since her twin otter flamed out and they jumped into the wilderness. 12 hungry days. 12 terrifying days. 12 wonderful days, because she found a man who truly loved her. A man she might have to be able to love for the rest of her life, if only he managed to survive the infection in his leg. It had only been her habit to stoke a fire all night to keep the predators away and snatch a nap every morning. She was exhausted and having trouble keeping her eyes open, but she didn't want to be asleep when Brian passed away. She didn't want him to die alone. She sat beside him, lifted his head onto her thigh, and tried to force a little water into his mouth. It dribbled down the sides of his face. "Darn it, Brian! Open your mouth and swallow. Do you hear me? I'm not going to die out here alone. We're going to be saved, so swallow." To her amazement, he did. "See, you're not gone yet. Keep fighting. Just keep fighting. Don't give up. Please don't give up." She sobbed. There was no one to hear her cry, no one to chastise her for being weak. In a fierce voice she said, "I love you. Do you hear me? I admit it. I'm willing to take a chance with you. If we get out of here alive, I promise I'll give it a try. I'll love you more than anyone's ever loved you before, and I'll expect you to love me just as much." We'll have those, page 218. Twins, 2 sets of them, and raise them to care about their aunts and uncles and grandfathers on both sides. We'll put a stop to this feud as surely and completely as you put a stop to all those fires. She swiped at the tears blurring her eyes, unwilling to lose sight of his beloved face. "Hello," she screamed. "Is anybody out there? Can anyone hear me? Help! Somebody answer me. Just open up your forsaken mouth and say something." "I can hear you," a female voice called out. Keeps yelling. At the sound of another human voice, a voice that meant salvation, Taylor's throat had swollen completely closed, and though she opened her mouth, no sound came out. Tears of frustration spurred from her eyes. She swallowed hard to get rid of the painful knot preventing speech, then took a deep breath and screamed at the top of her lungs, "We're here! We're right here!" She reached out with 2 fingers to check the pulse of Brian's throat. She couldn't find it. Page 236 and 237. Taylor was curious to hear Leah's answer to the question Vic had raised about their elder sister's relationship with Aiden. Had Leah forgiven him for the trick that he played on her? Was something more than information passing between the 2 of them? "What is going on between you and Aiden?" she asked. "We spent a lot of time together worrying about you and Brian," Leah explained, "so Aiden's been keeping me in the loop about his brother's situation." "Why is it okay for you to talk to Aiden, but not okay for me to spend time with Brian?" Taylor asked. Vic threw her hands up. "I give up. Why would either of you want to spend time with either of them? They're both crazy as loons." She grabbed some Cheerios from the cupboard and set a bowl and a spoon on the breakfast table bar. Before striding to the refrigerator for milk, she wet down the cereal and then stopped before taking a bite to shoot her twin a perturbed look. "I still don't get it. What's the point of spending time with an unconscious man? You've got plenty of sympathy for wolves and grizzlies. How about a little compassion for someone I care about?" Vic stopped with a spoon full of Cheerios halfway to her mouth. She dropped it back in the bowl with a clatter and a splash of milk. "That's a low blow. You can't expect me to care about Flynn's." "What happened to caring about me?" That was as close as Taylor could come about saying as she missed the tight bond that was between them, that appeared to have frayed over the past few years. Vic shoved her bowl aside and hurried across the room to fold Taylor in her arms. "I do care. I do. I just..." Page 238. "Don't understand the sudden need to forgive the Flynns, all the transgressions. You might as well be standing defenseless with a 1,000-pound grizzly in your path. I'm frightened for you. I don't want your belly ripped out. All I see ahead is suffering if you continue in the direction you're going." Taylor stuck her nose against Vic's throat and blinked at the tears that threatened. How long had it been since they hugged like this? They said the words, quote, "I love you," unquote, all the time, but somewhere along the way they stopped embracing when they met or when one of them went away. Both sisters had held her close at the hospital. She cut their embraces short because her feelings had been so near the surface, and she'd been so afraid she would fall apart if she let her guard down. She hadn't realized how much she needed to be held, to demonstratively loved. In Brian's absence, the constant fear she lived with, the knowledge of how unworthy, how undeserving of love she was, had crept back. In truth, Taylor hadn't shared everything with her twin in the past. She never told Vic how empty she felt inside, or how unlovable she felt until Brian Flynn had admitted to loving her. Vic had no way of knowing that Brian's love had filled that hole inside her, satisfying her need to feel valued in a way nothing and no one ever had. If she had known, Vic would have understood why Taylor sat by Brian's bedside praying that he would not only recover, but still feel the same way about her, because Vic was ignorant of all the facts. Taylor had no one with whom she was to share the constant fear that she felt that when Brian was well, he would simply walk away. Page 239. Was it any wonder that she didn't want to give up on that, the promise of love? She had a vested interest in seeing that Brian Flynn recovered until he was back on his feet. They couldn't move forward with their lives. It looked like Brian was going to keep his right leg, but a lot of muscle had to be cut away and wasn't coming back. Smoke jumping was completely out of the question. But depending on how well he rehabbed his right leg, he might be able to requalify as a firefighter with the Jackson Hole Fire Department. Taylor didn't intend to let Brian fail because her future happiness depended on his being whole, healthy, happy person ready to pursue a romantic relationship with her. "I'm leaving now," she said, pushing past Leah. When Leah took a step forward to stand in her way, Vic said, "Let her go. If she's determined to jump into the deep water without checking for unseen hazards, there's nothing else either of us can do about it, except be here to fish her out." Taylor saw that Leah's inclination was to physically restrain her from that dangerous, perhaps fatal leap. But at that last she stepped aside and gestured toward the door. "Go, just be careful, Taylor. Be very careful. I can't talk tonight, and I'm sorry. Go, just be careful, Taylor. Be very careful." Taylor didn't acknowledge Leah's warning. She couldn't afford to be careful. If she wanted to be safe, she kept her distance from Brian. She guarded her heart and not take any chance of having it broken. Page 240. Being safe wasn't going to get her where she wanted to go. She had to be fearless. She had to take chances. She had to do whatever was necessary to get Brian Flynn back on his feet, because she wasn't going to settle for less than happily ever after. Page 243. Brian? Of course Tag was here. Any other time he might have been glad to see her. Not now. Not when he was the most vulnerable. Not when he had only had moments to absorb the disaster that had befallen him and crushed his world. "Go away, Tag," he rasped. "Get the heck out." He turned his head and to avoid looking at her. The pain in his heart was every bit as raw as the pain in his throat. He didn't want her here. Couldn't have her here. Pitying him. No. Just one word denying him the peace he sought. He was fighting unmanly tears, those sobs that would completely undo him, and that dang woman wouldn't leave. Suddenly he felt her hand on his face, turning it back toward her, and then her lips were on his, offering comfort and seeking solace. The kiss made his chest ache because it spoke of what might have been. He couldn't make a commitment to her now, not when he had no idea whether he could even stand on his own 2 feet again. He put his hand on Tag's shoulder to push her away, but he was as weak as a kitten. She held his face between her hands. "Look at me, Brian." "Tag, don't do this," he said, fighting for control on his voice. Page 244. "You're awake. You're alive. We made it," she said in the softest voice he'd ever heard her use. "All we need to do now is get you well and back on your feet and back up to work." "We don't need to do anything," he said, forgetting about his throat and talking too loudly and paying the price with a pain of like razors cutting into his flesh. "You need to haul your butt out of here." "You mean my beautiful butt?" "The one you love to hold," she teased, her eyes smiling down at him with, oh God, was that love? Not now, Tag, he said, closing his eyes since they wouldn't allow him to look away. It hurts my throat to argue. Good, because there's nothing to fight about. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here to help. He realized that if he didn't nip this in the bud, she'd be here every day, driving him crazy, making him feel worse than he already did. He opened his eyes and looked her right in the eye. Listen to me, Tag, because I'm only going to say this once. Since it's painful to talk, I'm going to make this short and sweet. I don't want your help. I don't want you anywhere near me. He kept his face impassive as stone, while his stomach wrenched at the distraught look in her eyes. He gritted his teeth to keep from talking back what he said, but he didn't think he could have beat to have her watching him struggle to walk again. He didn't want her hanging around while he stumbled and fell and sweated and swore. He'd rather do it by himself. Page 245. What about us? She said. Us? He made that word an epithet. Don't kid yourself. Nothing happened out there was real. He put a hand on his ragged throat, then looked at her and realized the pain he caused to her and himself. By speaking, he should have shut the heck up. Why are you pushing me away? Do I need a reason? You said anything I said before I became a cripple should be taken with a grain of salt. Get over yourself, Brian. You still got your leg. Lots of veterans, like the ones who come to Connor's ranch, have lost a lot more than a chunk of flesh and gone on to leading fulfilling lives, doing some job that wasn't what they planned for themselves. Who do you think you are? What makes you so special? She was yelling at him, but he noticed she wasn't tearful. She was seriously ticked off. He held up a hand to stop her tirade, but it wasn't necessary. The door to his room flew open. The two brothers towered in the doorway. Aiden crossed the room, and in 3 strides he demanded of Taylor, "What's all this shouting about?" Connor gripped the rail at the foot of Brian's bed and said, "Brian?" Brian waved his hand and turned his face away without speaking. "Your brother's being a horse's patoot," Tag said. "Brian," Aiden said in front of the gentle voice you might use with a kid who had just fallen off the horse he was learning to ride, "what's going on?" Brian avoided looking at Tag as he said, "I want her gone." "And I told him I'm staying," Tag shot back. Connor focused his gaze on Tag and said pointedly, "We need to talk to Brian alone." For a moment he thought Tag would refuse to go. He watched her from the corner of his eye, and she shot a look fiery enough to burn down the half of Yellowstone, then marched out of the room. She stopped at the door and said, "Don't think you can get rid of me this easily, Brian. I'll be back." With all the destructive force of the Terminator, Brian thought with his chagrin. After the door closed, Connor said to Aiden, "I told you to keep her out of here. You should have listened to me." "Are you okay?" Aiden asked. This is page 246. Brian tried to shrug. It hurt. Everything hurt. His head was pounding, his leg ached, his face felt hot. Did he still have a fever? Was it something that might return? Could the infection come back and claim the rest of his leg? He shuddered at that thought of being out of his head again. He just wanted everyone to leave him alone. "Why are you here?" he whispered, saving his poor throat. "We heard you were awake," Connor said. "We wanted to see for ourselves how you were doing. Devon would have been here too, but he's got some horses that he needs." Brian cut him off. "I'm fine. Tell Devon I'm okay, and there's no need to come." "Brian, about your leg," Aiden said. Page 247. "The doctor told me what he did, and his prognosis. Is there something else you want?" He heard the annoyance in his voice, but she was helpless to control it. What did they want from him? An acknowledgement that he didn't mind what the doctor had done to him? That he was fine with being a cripple because at least he was still alive? Brian realized he probably needed to get the gut check Tag had given him. Every thought he'd had since he woken up had been filled with self-pity. He was lucky to have survived the infection. He could have lost his entire leg. Most of it was attached. Why was he being such a crybaby? What did his moaning and groaning say about his character? What did his despair say about him as a man? Was that what he wanted, Tag gone? Because he didn't want to see a weak reed that he was? Because he didn't want her to see that he wasn't man enough to meet the challenge life had dealt him without sobbing into his pillow? Aiden touched him on the shoulder. Brian, are you all right? He realized his eyes had filled with tears and that one had run down his cheek. He swiped it away. For crying out loud, get out of here and leave me alone. He tried to turn on his side and from them and cried out when his leg cut up brushed against the sheets. He felt Aiden's hand on his shoulder, an offer of comfort that he desperately wanted but was afraid to accept. Page 248. For fear that he'd break apart. He squeezed his eyes closed and bunched his hands into fists under the covers to keep his brothers from seeing how hard he was trembling. He would get through this misfortune on his own. He would do it to prove it to himself that he could. He had as much courage as the next man. He demonstrated that every time he jumped a fire, he would do whatever it took to endure whatever pain there was to walk again. And he would walk without a cane, or his name wasn't Brian Flynn. Okay, page 252 and 253. It would have been far easier to take Brian at his word at the hospital, to fall back on her lifelong belief that she just wasn't that sort of person a man could love. But something happened to her in the wilderness. Brian happened. He said he loved her. She believed him. They had planned their futures together, and when he'd been incapacitated, she found an inner resource that she hadn't known, and she fought for both Brian's life and her own. She kept them alive long enough to be rescued, and she done it because she wanted to spend her life sharing the love with Brian had promised. She wasn't about to give up now just because Brian was feeling scared of what the future held. She was scared too. There was no guarantees going forward that everything would turn out the way either of them hoped, but she wasn't going to let his fear keep her away. Taylor wasn't stupid or naive, even though she'd grown up in a house full of girls. Or maybe because of it, she had some inkling of how fragile the male ego was. Men were like some of the most resilient sea creatures, soft and vulnerable on the inside, while the hard shell they hid behind whenever they felt threatened. At the hospital, Brian had been doing and saying only what was necessary to protect himself until he could come back stronger than ever. She gathered from the way he was talking that he wasn't sure he was ever going to be the man that he once was. His order to, quote, go away, end quote, was simply the result of a vulnerable creature retreating into his protective shell. Taylor could understand Brian's anger and grief over having to give up the work he loved. She was perfectly willing to give him time to heal and adjust to this new reality, but not too much time. She wasn't going to wait until Brian was completely well to trust him to pick up their relationship where they left off in the wilderness. She was going to walk beside him every step along the way, loving him, letting him lean on her, letting him learn that he could trust her not to walk away from him again. That was page 253. Whew. Here we go again. I'm going to probably go for, I'll take you up to chapter 30. How does that sound? So we got 4 more pages. This is page 260. He looked up and saw Aiden in the doorway and said, you look like your dog died. I'm the one that's crippled leg. What the heck is your problem? You're my problem. Brian's heartbeat retched up. Is there something the doctor didn't tell me? Is the infection worse? Does he want to cut my leg off? Whoa there, Mr. Leap out of plains into bursting forest. Don't start jumping to conclusions. Then what is it? Aiden settled onto the foot of Brian's bed. Would you believe a romance gone wrong? Brian hissed out a relieved breath. The infection wasn't back, and the doctor didn't want to cut off his leg. He suddenly realized what must be troubling Aiden. Leah? Who else? I'm sorry, Aiden. What I did telling her about the bet was the pits. You can have my Harley as soon, Brian yelped when Aiden jumped up quickly enough to jerk the sheets around his leg. Ow, watch it! Aiden didn't apologize, just glared at him. I don't want your stupid Harley. I want Leah back. So get her back, Brian snapped, and stay off my bed. He grimaced and he gently rearranged the sheet around his injured limb. Aiden paced the room in agitation. She says she can never trust me again. She's not giving me a second chance. Page 261. Then move on. He stopped and confronted Brian. You just don't get it. Get what? I love her. I want to spend the rest of my life with her. Brian bit his tongue rather than say it'll never work, but he didn't think it would ever work. It just wasn't the animosity between their families. The obstacle keeping them apart was plain old logistics. Both Aiden and Leah ran their father's ranches, which meant they needed to live in two different places. Matt's appearance had complicated things for Leah, but Brian didn't think she'd give up Kingdom Come without a heck of a fight, and Aiden would never leave the Lucky Seven. If you're looking for suggestions, Brian said, I don't have any. Aiden groaned as he ruffled his hair and then smoothed it back down. I just need to vent with someone, and since you're the only person who knows about this, you're it. That's not exactly true. Brian, if you're... Aiden began. Brian put up both hands to cut him off. Hey, Tag and I thought we were going to die in that cave. I was feeling guilty about never being able to make things square with you, so I told her what I did. His brother looked horrified. She knows about me and Leah? Not about you being married, but yeah, she knows about the bet. I didn't tell Tag not to say anything, but I don't think she will. I mean, she wouldn't want to hurt. Page 262. Leah's feelings by telling her she knows what we did, would she? Should I call her? No, hell no. If you mess this up any more than you already have, Brian, I swear I'll hack off both your legs myself. Don't worry, I won't be seeing Tag again. Aiden frowned. I thought you guys kind of got close. When Leah and I found you two, she was holding you in her arms like you were the love of her life. From what I saw and what I heard later, she's the one who kept you alive. Brian felt his face flush with embarrassment. I have no idea what she did because I was out of it. Nobody's said anything to me about her part in this before now. Well, you should get down on your knees when you can and thank her. Brian remembered how he kicked Tag out of his room. How he denied having any feelings for her. No wonder she'd been so mad. He missed her constant chatter, missed holding her, touching her, being with her. He had vivid memories of the last 2 days, he had vivid memories of the two of them during the last days he'd been lucid. How he'd told Tag that he loved her, how they planned their future together. But he wasn't the same man who spoke those words of love, and he needed time, space to figure out whether or not he was going to have any sort of future to offer her. Aiden had remained silent, and Brian realized the two of them made a great pair, both of them brooding over Greyhawk women. Page 263. He would have laughed if the whole situation hadn't been so tragic. Sorry I couldn't be more help solving your problem with Leah, he said at last. Yeah, me too. What are you going to do? Aiden shrugged. Wait and hope, and how about you? Me? Yeah, what about you and Tag? There's nothing. Don't try to BS me. She's in love with you. If I remember correctly, you spent a lot of time sulking in your room when she broke up with you in high school. You saved her life getting the two of you out of that plane and into that cave. She saved yours treating that wound in your leg. That sort of life-affirming experience tends to bond people. We're not stuck in a cave anymore. We have separate lives. Aiden snorted. If Tag's the woman you want, you should run after her as fast as you can. I can't run anywhere. You don't have to be standing on 2 feet to let her know that you're interested. She showed up in this room the instant she got out of her hospital bed, and she sat here beside you day after day until you woke up. That says something. Crap. What's wrong now? I threw her out and told her not to come back. You'll kick yourself from here to Sunday, Aiden said. Page 264. If you let her get away a second time, maybe I won't end up with the love of my life. But there's no reason you have to screw up your own love life as well. Just don't lie there. He gave Brian a slap on the back. Do something about it. He turned and marched out of the room, leaving Brian with a stinging shoulder and a great deal of food for thought. I was going to say if it's a short... Oh, we can keep going for a little bit. When he finally stepped inside the $1 million cowboy bar, it was nearly dark and the lights inside were inviting. He looked forward to having a drink without someone asking if it was a good idea for him to be consuming alcohol when he was taking his medication. This is Brian, by the way. Page 268. Brian made his way to the bar on his crutches and realized when he got there how difficult it would be to seat himself on one of those saddles the bar used for stools. His lips flattened into disgust, and he was going to have to think about such things for the rest of his life. He was about to head for a table when he heard his name called. Brian? He recognized that sultry voice. He shifted his gaze and found Tag sitting on one of the saddles. His stomach did a quick somersault and landed sideways. Hi, Tag. He was so glad to see her. She looked surprised to see him, but he surely wasn't. She looked surprised to see him, but he wasn't sure how glad she was. He couldn't read her expression. Cautious, anxious, page 269. He didn't want her to take off because he was pretty sure he wouldn't be able to move fast enough on crutches to catch up with her. He searched for something to say, but he was distracted by simply the sight of her. She looked so great. She had let her blonde hair grow even longer, and it looked bouncy and silky at the same time. She wore mascara that emphasized the long lashes above her blue eyes and lipstick that made him want to invade her mouth with his tongue. She wore a red cashmere sweater that fell off one of her smooth shoulders, a pair of jeans with a row of fox diamonds on the back of the pockets that emphasized her beautiful butt, and tooled her leather cowboy boots. You look good, he said in a husky voice. Thanks. After his stint in the hospital, he wondered if his libido was gone, along with the chunk of his leg. He got proof in the next 30 seconds when it was humming along all cylinders, and she searched for his face and said, You look good too. Looks can be deceiving. She glanced at the crutches. Things not going as well as you hoped? Not nearly as well as I hoped. I'm headed for one of those tables. You want to join me? He saw her hesitation and willed her to agree. At last she said, All right. Page 270. She hadn't seemed enthusiastic, but at least she hadn't said no. He signaled the bartender who brought him his regular drink, a 12-year-old single malt scotch. He pulled out her chair, and then she sat down, and laying the crutches on the floor, he eyed her drink, some kind of liquor mixed with what looked like Coke and a slice of lime, which she carried from the bar. Can I buy you another one? She shook her head. I'm driving. Lucky you driving. You can't. Not yet, to be honest. I'm not even close. Bummer. She swallowed the last of her drink, and he had the feeling that she was going to bolt. He wasn't sure how to keep her in her seat. He blurted, I should have called. Yes, you should have. Her voice was decisively cool. What have you been doing with yourself? This and that. She wasn't making this easy, but why should she? He was the one who kicked her out of his life. Apparently she was in no hurry to step back in. Of course, now that she was running, he felt obligated to chase her, even if he had to do it on crutches. I've been out of the hospital for 2 weeks, he said. I heard. I've been staying at home. How's that going? What? He was so distracted. Recuperating at home, she said. How's that going? Page 271. Not as well as I'd like. It's too bad you don't live here in town, she said. At least you could get around on your crutches, visit the guys at the firehouse, get to rehab more easily. She was right about that. Maybe he ought to stay at a hotel tonight and spend some time looking for a more convenient place to live. I moved to town last month, she said. Did Matt do something to tick you off? No more than usual. I just decided to leave the ranch on my own terms rather than wait for him to shove me out the door. Where are you living? I've got a 1-story place on Snow King Mountain. He whistled. Nice. Brian considered how great it would be to have if he had a 1-story place of his own in town. No stairs, the convenience of being close to rehab and the fire station. He could drop in to BS with the guys or just go get himself some lunch or dinner at one of the restaurants in town. No father asking when he was going to be back to work. No brother asking him how he was feeling. And then he had a brilliant idea. He took a drink and swallowed to give himself another moment to consider before he said, How many bedrooms do you have? Why do you ask? How would you like to rent me one? I wouldn't. Come on, Tag, have a heart. I'm a cripple. This is page 272. You said you wanted me gone, Brian. Now you want to live in the same house? I don't think so. Aiden and Angus are killing me with kindness. If I don't get away from the Lucky Seven soon, I can't be held responsible for my actions. You don't want me ending up in prison for murder, do you?" She laughed, and bubbly sound woke up in something inside him that made him doormat from the moment she walked out of that hospital room. And his life. He suddenly saw Tag. He had no trouble imagining what it would be like to be with her again. Then he remembered how ugly his right leg looked, a vein streaked up. "And how about it?" he said, his voice harsh with the realization that he had a long way to go before he could be with her. "It would never work, Brian. Our families would have a fit." Page 273. "Do you care? Aren't we past that? Didn't we already decide not to let them rule our lives? That was before. This is after. Things have changed." "What? Name one thing." "You're not a whole man." His face blanched. It felt though as she stabbed him in the heart. She grabbed his arm to keep him from rising. "I didn't mean the way that it sounded. You still don't know how much use you'll have of your injured leg, whether it will allow you to resume your work as a firefighter or not. You have a lot of decisions to make about your life. If you move in, it could complicate things even more. Sitting here, knowing how badly you treated me, I still want you, and I believe you want me." She shot him an expressive look from beneath lowered lashes that made it clear what she meant. "I don't see us not denying ourselves what we want for long." He would have jumped in, but she didn't give him a chance. "I wish I could ignore the feelings I have when I'm with you. I can't. My point is, I don't want to end up getting hurt again when you finally make up your mind that what you're going to do with the rest of your life and decide you don't want me around to be part of it. Can I say something now?" She nodded. "All you're doing is renting me a room. I'll feed myself in town. I'll get myself to rehab. All I want is a place to stay that's far away from my loving family." He smiled to ease the bite of his words. He loved his family. He just needed some distance from them. Page 274. She smiled ruefully, and he held his breath, hoping that meant she was going to give in. "You know, this is a mistake, Brian. Please, Tag, I'm desperate." He saw her uncertainty, her fear, and finally her surrender. There's that word again. "All right," she said. When do you want to move in?" He felt a knot of tension ease in his shoulders. "Tonight." She made a face. "Tonight? Isn't that a little sudden?" "I told you I'm at the end of my rope, but I can buy whatever I need for now at the drugstore and get a bag of clothes from home some other time." She looked skeptical. "Are you sure this is what you want to do?" "Absolutely." He saw several thoughtful wrinkles appear in her forehead and asked, "Is there another problem?" She looked sheepish. "I'm trying to remember whether or not I left dishes in the kitchen sink and magazines strewn all over the living room." "Just so long that you have sheets for the bed." "Oh, I made up all the beds." "All the beds? How many are there?" "4, one in each bedroom." She looked embarrassed as she admitted it. "I was just having so much fun I got a little carried away decorating. She shrugged, "did the whole place. Can't wait to see it." Page 275. "Finish up your drink and I'll take you there." Brian realized Tag might be right. He might be making a mistake moving in with her. She was clearly wary of renewing their romance. He would have to respect the limits she set and tell his libido to take a hike. But he didn't see where he had a choice. It was move in with her or go certifiably crazy. One danger seemed a whole lot less frightening than the other. Oh, goodness. I'm like looking, going, okay, how many more pages? I got a lot. Okay. Page 277. Because of her pregnancy, Taylor had completely abandoned the idea of having Brian move in with her. When he got tired of his family, she needed to make plans of her own for a nursery, and for Lamaze and breastfeeding classes, since she wanted to have natural childbirth and nurse the baby. She had to schedule a visit to her OBGYN to get a checkup and a prescription for prenatal vitamins. She was busy growing a baby inside her belly and frankly didn't have energy to cope with, page 278, another spoiled, rotten baby who couldn't face the truth about his future. That's a little harsh, don't you think? No, I'm just telling it like I see it. This is her talking to herself. She had to face facts. She had to walk away from Brian Flynn and move on with her life. The decision was made. Taylor had visited her OBGYN in the late afternoon. Afterward, she headed to the $1 Million Cowboy to celebrate her good health and good health of her child. She asked for the bartender for a rum and coke, please, but hold the rum. A slice of lime. She was sitting at the bar, summoning up the courage to tell her family about the baby, a Flynn baby, when Brian Flynn walked in. Taylor should have slid off that saddle seat and run like the devil on her heels. She should have never said one single word to him. What on earth possessed her to let Brian Flynn back into her life? Hope. You're clinging to hope. That once cloud of pain and confusion about his future has cleared. Brian will be able to see you for the love of his life. This is her talking to herself. Taylor had known she was taking a terrible chance even speaking to him. The more time she spent with Brian, the more chance of becoming emotionally engaged. It had been heartbreaking when she made the completely logical decision to walk away from him after his rant at the hospital to cut off her love like an amputated limb. She'd gone through several boxes of Kleenex and still left her pillow wet with tears. It would be devastating if she allowed herself to fall in love with Brian all over again. And he abandoned her for a second time. Page 279. And then there was the ticking time bomb. That's no way to describe your darling baby. This is her talking to herself again. A loudly ticking time bomb growing in her belly. Brian was going to find out the truth. She ought to tell him sooner rather than later and give him a chance to back out of the living in the same house with a woman who was carrying his baby, which he might or might not want to acknowledge. Not now, not yet. Give yourself a little time. That's her talking to herself again. For what? Brian's scarred flesh wasn't going to magically reconstruct itself. He was still on crutches. He winced with pain when he sat down in the bar, when he shifted in his chair, and when he got up again. He must always be on edge of lashing out at whoever was the closest. When he suffered such constant torment, at what point should she add to that burden, telling him that she was pregnant with his baby? Now this is her talking to herself. Not now, for heaven's sake. Get a hold of yourself. You'll know when the time is right. Just wait. Wait until you see the way the wind is blowing, and don't give up hope. Brian threw his crutches into the back of her pickup, hopped and huffed and puffed his way to the door, and then used his arms and his good leg to lift himself inside. He heaved a sigh of relief that appeared as a cloud in front of his mouth before he closed the door. Fall has fallen, he said. I want to be off these crutches before I have to worry about navigating icy sidewalks. Taylor started the engine and headed for the closest overnight pharmacy where Brian could buy the supplies he needed. What did the physical therapist say? The same thing that Noyes is saying, which is, be patient. I take it's not one of your better qualities. You noticed, I want to be back on both feet without the need of crutches or a cane, and I want it now. She shot him a teasing look and said, you'll just have to be patient. Brian's laughter was cut short when she hit a pothole that jarred his leg. She watched him grit his teeth, but he didn't say anything, and she didn't either. Page 280. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from suggesting that she should be the one to stop at the drugstore. She simply parked in front of the brightly lit store and said, have fun. She saw him flinch and when he exited the truck and gasped as he hopped out to the back of the pickup with his crutches and grit his teeth as he headed inside. He returned 5 minutes later with 2 plastic bags, which he threw into the bench seat between them, before repeating the whole quote, throw the crutches in the back and hop it to the seat, end quote, business. 4 tension-filled moments later, without another word of conversation, they arrived at her house on the mountain. This is it, she said, as she hit the button for the closest door and pulled onto the 2-car garage. Taylor couldn't help but remembering how earlier in the day she'd been moping around her lonely home, regretting the fact that Brian would never lounge on the leather couch or be sprawled in her woolly buffalo hide in the front of the stone fireplace, and suddenly he was there. Page 281. Do you want me to get your crutches for you? The words were out before she could stop them. She knew Brian didn't want help or anybody's help, which his next words confirmed. I can do it. She stood at the kitchen door waiting for him, then stepped back to let him inside. Wow, Tag, he said, his gaze taking in the sizable main floor, which had an open concept. This is amazing. Thanks. It was trashed when I bought it, but I managed to put it back together a little bit at a time. I like the fact that it's perched on a mountain, tucked in amongst the trees, yet still in walking distance to town. I bet it's beautiful here when the aspen's gold. It was. That happened during the last week of September, the first week of October, when she'd been pining for a moment with Brian just like this. Now the aspens were bare, but enough conifers were left. Lodgepole pine and blue spruce to make it feel like the house was nestled in the forest. She watched Brian turn in a circle, using his crutches to prop him up. The great room with its cathedral ceilings included the living room, dining room, and kitchen. I love the wood floors and the counters and the stone in the walls and the fireplace. He said, best of all, you have a couch long enough for me to stretch out on. We're going to skip ahead because I don't see where I've marked any of this part. Yeah. Page 287. Taylor could see why anyone living with Brian would have a difficult time not asking how are you or how do you feel or how's the rehab going. She wanted to ask all those questions herself, but she stilled her tongue and let him do the talking. I thought I'd be further along by now, he said. She kept her eyes focused on her book and just said, uh-huh. The chief told me she'd take me back if I can pass the muster physically. That's good news, she said, reading the same sentence again. Hey, look at me. She looked up. What? Am I that boring? I thought the whole reason you came here was because you were sick and tired of everyone asking about your injury, but that's pretty much all you've talked about since you sat down. Taylor saw the shock on his face. She knew what getting back to normal must always be the first and foremost in his thoughts. Part of what she hoped to accomplish by having Brian here was to get him to focus on living a life that didn't necessarily depend on a leg that functioned normally. That was page 287. We'll read to chapter 32, and then we are quitting. Page 288. Once that happened, she could tell him he was going to be a father. He gave a self-deprecating laugh. I guess I needed to hear that. I've been so self-absorbed by my rehab that my life has shrunk down, so it doesn't include much else. May I suggest Broncos football tomorrow afternoon? She said with a playful smile. Sure, I'll make the popcorn. I'll just have that, quote, girl, end quote, drink in the fridge, which are Diet Coke and a bottle of Chardonnay. The doctor said she could have an occasional glass of wine, but she was waiting for one of her sisters to visit before opening that bottle. I'll have some Heineken delivered tomorrow with my clothes, he said. Be sure to have whoever brings your stuff pick up some popcorn. I don't have any in the house. He laughed. You got it. Are you going to tell your family where you're staying? He thought about that for a moment. I'll tell Aiden. He'll leave me alone and keep the rest of them from worrying. How about your family? What are they going to say when they find out we're roommates? They won't like it, but it's my life. Taylor had long since realized she couldn't love Brian and keep fighting his family. Brian had more than once said that he opted out of the feud from their fathers. Taylor wanted to try. She wasn't sure what Leah and Vic were going to say when they realized she was no longer going to wage war on the Flynns. Page 289. And that's where we're going to stop tonight. It looks like tomorrow night we should be finished with Surrender. So I'm really excited about this for a lot of reasons, because I've been through with this book now a day and a half and I'm still reading the book. And I guess that means it's going to get a wonderful rating at the end of the reading. So, see you all tomorrow night. We're going to finish up Surrender. Promise.